This is a huge topic, and we are not necessarily aware of it. Indeed, social networks and artificial intelligence, which has just been added, are used by foreign powers to destabilize our democracies. Here you have cited a case. I do not know by whom it is signed, in any case. There are elements to show that it comes from abroad, and that it is rather to destabilize us. For example, a few months ago there was false information. It was not a false site that circulated, but it was false information that said that we had sent 1,000 legionnaires to the front in Ukraine. You may have read it, maybe at a raw moment. All this was totally false, but it circulated. It was seen millions of times. And the best example to see the risk that we run is what happened in Romania, where elections were cancelled in the first round, with a technique that looks a bit like what you have just described and what you have denounced. That is to say that in Romania, the pro-Russians, helped by Russia, set up for months methodically false accounts. And they first identified people who were vulnerable to false information, because it does not work with everyone. There is a form of vulnerability. So people who were interested in parallel medicine, people who were interested in religion, it does not mean that everyone can believe in nonsense when we look at these sites, but it creates predispositions. In any case, they had identified it as possible areas. And then local information. And they created methodically for months false accounts, false pages, thousands and thousands of false pages, but they suddenly attracted people. And then, when the campaign was launched, the candidate who was supported, pushed by the pro-Russians, began to make networks that sent back to these false accounts. And that created a viral loop, which made it an absolutely crazy success, and was pushed by all this, which obviously failed democratic functioning. So, all this to tell you that we are not talking about fiction, things that are not possible. It happened in a great democracy of the European Union, what I'm telling you. And so it is clear that it will happen in any case. They will try things during the electoral campaigns, as they did there. So what do we do about it? Indeed, it was said, we created an agency that is vigilant, and therefore that looks, that relates, that does investigations, and now we get the information. And as soon as we have the information established, we have a dialogue with the sites. And so how can we do, and what is our action? And what has undoubtedly been, I will check, because I do not know the exact case that you mentioned, but what do we do about these sites? The only thing we can do legally today, we will look at all these false sites, and we say that it does not correspond to the general conditions of use, and we ask them to withdraw. And so that's what Viginium teams do. They ask for the withdrawal of these sites, all this information, when they are identified as being interference. Simply, it's extremely long, complicated, slow. And so we can see that we are in a phase, and this is what we are preparing, where we will have to harden. And so what we want to put in place, and we did it a bit with the first directives, the Directive on Digital Services, which was pushed by France in 2022 during our presidency, then adopted a few months later, is to put in place a real system of platform responsibility. The only way to be able to be very responsive and avoid suffering, as you said, is that hosts or platforms are a responsibility when they let false information or false sites prosper, which are the result of interference. As you are, as a press title, if there was false information that was pushed in one of the titles of the Ibra group, or an interference, I would ask you to withdraw it, or Viginium, and if it was not done, we will question your responsibility. This is not the case today for these sites. So one, it exists, and what you have described shows it. Two, we now know how to attribute it, that is to say, we still manage most of the time to go back to power. I mentioned Russia, which is the most aggressive, but it is not the only one. We could go back to it. Three, we manage to act, but really it is a battle of teams on a daily basis. Four, now we are going to have to industrialize, so we are putting in a lot more resources. We are also putting in more to alert everyone to this risk, and to put in place a system of responsibility for platforms and networks, so that they withdraw much faster, and if they do not withdraw, so that they themselves do the hunting, and that they have a responsibility when they let these interferences prosper. I work in communication, so I'm involved in social networks on a daily basis, and I am mainly of Romanian and French nationality. So exactly 1 year ago, there was the cancellation of the first round of the Romanian elections by the Constitutional Court, which is historical. And this created in the heart of the Romanian diaspora a strong mobilization, of which I was part. We had a lot of concerns, given the passive nature of our country, which experienced a very severe communist regime not long ago. Romania is a country close to France, and my question, you have already answered it a little bit, but it is to know, with the approach of the municipal and presidential elections next year, how we can prepare ourselves and not relive the experience that Romania or even Moldova has experienced. Thank you, I will start answering. Romania has made a return to experience. There is a very complete report that has been done by Romania, which it has shared with us, which allows me to tell you what I have just explained, with the methodical work that has been done before by, I would say, largely the Russians and the pro-Russians. Moldova also had its election, with a lot of interference from Russia, which tried to manipulate the most organized system we have seen, is clearly the one in Romania, because it was done on both false information on the networks, but a lot of controlling, and so in a way they created a nebula, and then they accelerated. In Moldova, it was a lot of false information that was pushed by accounts. So the way to prepare is, 1, to strengthen the system, what we do with Virginium. 2, it is to make things public. That is to say, in a democracy we are all antibodies to interference normally. When we know that we are a victim of this, when we know that we can be exposed to this, and that's why all their strategies first rely on people who are a little weaker or credulous, who identify. But we all, if we are lucid and we know it, we know that the risk exists. We pay more attention, we are more vigilant, and that is very important. And it is for me also the importance of our debates. It is that it creates vigilance because we become aware. Honestly, 1 or 2 years ago, I think that no one, we would have had the debate in a room like this today. 2 years ago, no one would have said it can happen. No one. And I would even say, I would go back to just before 2022, it's still not in Tuzalem, before the outbreak of the Russian aggression war in Ukraine, where we had much less interference, much less information warfare, pushed by Russia. Well, you would have told me he's crazy or he's paranoid, but today it's really a reality. So our vigilance, it's first of all something that protects us. Then we will release at the beginning of next year a very complete work that has been done on this subject, piloted by Virginium and the General Secretariat for Defense and National Security, and who piloted this with the best experts. And we will also push all the experts from all the think tanks, the academics, to explain how this risk exists. And then thirdly, we set up systems where we disconnect much faster, as I said. That is to say, we create a responsibility for the platforms. There is another fight that is related to this. Finally, there are 2 things that I consider very important in this fight, and which must be highlighted here. The first is the subject of false accounts. They are called bots, trolls. You may have heard of that, but you don't see them. That is to say, when you have a message that is strongly linked, and you say, there were still 2 million people who supported it. When suddenly, this message or this information ends up becoming viral, when then it sometimes becomes a form of information, in any case a social fact, which is then legitimately taken up by the press, because they say, there are still 2.5 million people who pushed this. You don't know how to say today, if there are 2 million people. You know that there are 2 million accounts. But you don't know how to say if there are real people behind these accounts. So there are people who have fun with this, for commercial reasons, sometimes political. But there are a lot of people who use this for geopolitical reasons. And those who are involved, and in the case of Romania, it was very identified, there were massive troll farms. And so you had millions of false accounts that were mobilized. We must demand from these social networks the fact that they make sure that they guarantee that behind each account there is a real person. Another question we may come back to in the debate is that of anonymity. But at the very least, we need to know if there is someone in real life or not. And if there is no one in real life, we can see that they are falsifying the exchanges. They are falsifying democracy. They falsify it when we have a matter of interference. But even when we're going to exchange with someone on an account, if it is a false account, it changes everything, if there is no real person behind it. So this is something that we are going to demand, we are going to fight. It is a fight that we will have to wage at the European level, and it is absolutely key. The second is that in the electoral periods we no longer have to allow the purchase of pages of information. And here I may make a small parenthesis, if you allow me, just a minute. Because when we talk about all this, we are going to come back, I think, to all the subjects that deal with social networks. I think that collectively we should never forget what we are talking about. And I think that this little clarification is important for all of us. That is to say that when I want to inform myself, well, I'm going to watch a newspaper on television. We have people who are paid for that. And there is a public contribution. There is an economic model behind it, where I'm going to buy a press title, regional or national. I pay to be informed. And then the newspapers will complete this remuneration by what it touches, by legal announcements or advertising. But there is an economic model I pay to be informed. I make a step towards professional people. Social networks, when we are informed about them, are they made to inform you? No. What are social networks made for? They are made to attract you, to create excitement in your home, to sell individualized advertising pages. This is the economic model. And this is why the infrastructure that these social networks constitute, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, because it allows you to do a lot of great things, to alert, to exchange, etc. But it is an infrastructure that is created today, whose economic model is not non-profit, as we say in good French. It is not charitable. It is an economic model based on the sale of individualized advertising. Because, in fact, they will collect data on you to be able to say to this advertiser, I have someone who likes this type of product, who is oriented. I will be able to promote your advertising. It's much better than showing them, or even putting them in the press. That's why we lost a lot of money in our press model because of that. So if that's it, you have to understand that the goal of these social networks is not that you have a deliberation, that you are informed. Their goal is that you allocate a maximum amount of time. It is to create the maximum amount of excitement, to have the maximum amount of information, and to be able to promote the maximum amount of advertising pages. Once we understand that, we understand that in the order of things, argumentation is the least interesting for social networks. Because when I change an argumentation, it does not create excitement. I inform myself it's very good, and then I leave. Emotion is better, because it will create more traffic. But negative emotion is even better, because it's the one that goes so rage, anger, etc. Look where, when we're on a social network, what works, that's it. Or what is addictive, and that the algorithms spot. And so let's never forget in our discussions that when we talk about social networks, and I say that it can be a great thing, social networks too, but we are talking about something that is structured to create dependence, excitement, and therefore rather negative emotions, because they earn their money by pushing you from individualized advertising. Once we have understood this bias, we say to ourselves, it is probably not there that we must inform ourselves prioritarily, and we can see that this bias is a vulnerability in relation to foreign interference. Because if I buy massively pages in periods, pages or accounts, or information that I can push, because I can also have sponsored things on these networks, in electoral period I can totally penetrate the informational space. And so, beyond what we said, transparency and the ban of trolls and fake accounts, and the ban in electoral period of all remunerated advertising, remunerated pages or content pushed are key.